Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Princeton Review's webinar, Law School Admission 101. My name is Valerie, and I'm part of the Princeton Review's national marketing team. I'll be co-hosting our presentation tonight along with Maximilian Clark. Before we kick off our webinar, let's cover a couple of housekeeping items. So just so you guys know, everyone's lines are muted. So if you have a question or if there's something you'd like to share with us, please use the question box located in your GoToWebinar menu bar. Also, we're going to do our very best to get through everyone's questions tonight, but if we're unable to get to yours, one of our experts will be following up with you after the webinar. Additionally, tonight's session is being recorded, so there's no need to take notes unless you want to. Each of you will be receiving a copy of the webinar recording within 48 hours. So sit back, enjoy, and learn some strategies. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to pass it along to Max, and he's going to give you a little bit of an introduction as to his experience. All right, Max, take it away.
Hello, nation. My name is Maximilian Clark, and I am one of Princeton Review's premier LSAT tutors and one of our master trainers, which means I train other LSAT instructors how to teach the test. And yeah, I'll be your guide through the LSAT this evening. I want you to realize, as Valerie said, that we won't be doing questions during because we're recording this for posterity. But if you do come up with a question as we go, please write it down so that when we get to the question part at the end, you don't have to try to remember the thing that you want to ask. We will try to get to everyone's questions, and as Valerie said, we're going to do our best to make sure that if we didn't get to your question, that question does get answered sooner rather than later. So tonight we are going to talk about law school admissions. Very, very, very exciting. We first are going to talk about what your timeline should be. I know that probably each of you is at a different stage of your LSAT prep. Some of you are probably deep into studying. Maybe some of you are planning on taking it soon. Some of you may just be vaguely curious about the idea of becoming a lawyer. And so we want to lay out the foundations for all of you in terms of how you get from where you are now until you are sitting in law school. So we'll be talking about preparation. We'll be talking about the test itself, what's on it, what they test, and then we're going to be talking about how Princeton Review can help you out and make ourselves available for questions so that you feel confident in your approach to the LSAT. So a bit about me. Like I said, my name's Max, and I've been with the Princeton Review since 2011. And these are excellent facts about me. I am an expert 3-ball juggler. I also do clubs and fire. And if you are looking to learn one of those things as one of our tutors, I mean, heck, I'll teach you how to do it. Just talk to the New York office if you want an in-person demonstration. But yeah, I love this test. The LSAT is my baby here at the Princeton Review. I spend all of my time tutoring it and thinking about it because it's like fundamentally the most fun test in the world. And I know some of you who have started studying for it are like, well, obviously, Max, I've never had more fun taking a test before. And some of you who haven't started yet are thinking that I'm a giant nerd. And you're not wrong. You're not wrong. But the test is just the best in terms of all standardized tests. In my humble opinion, and I teach the GRE, I teach the GMAT, but I try not to whenever there's an opportunity to teach the LSAT. I'm going to be lending you my expertise as built over the last 6 years. But first thing I want to know from you is we're going to be launching a poll right now. I just want to have a sense of where you are on your journey to take the LSAT before we get into the timeline. So on your little viewer thing, we have just opened a poll, seeing where some of you are. So if you're testing in September, a lot of you in September. Some of you aren't sure, which is totally fine. Maybe it's too soon for you to make that decision. Some of you are testing in June, which is great. We have some December testers and a few testing in February. Oh man, look at this response, 80% so far. All right, come on, that other 20%. Get on it. All right, Yeah, so it seems like for a lot of you, the LSAT is an imminent reality. And we'll be talking about how our timeline changes depending on when you want to go to law school. Yeah, this is super useful. Okay, so for those of you, for the 31% of you who are going to be taking the test in, yikes, 2.5 weeks, obviously a lot of the more abstract ideas of like of when you should start studying and classes and courses may not be as valuable, but we are going to start off by talking a lot about what you need for your admissions packet and how to best present yourself to law schools. So for everyone who's testing this fall, this is the stuff that you want to be working on right now. And we'll go into detail about that. For those of you who are testing in June or perhaps later, we will be talking about some of the fundamentals about like what's on the test and what the test involves, and good mindsets to adopt and ways just to lay the foundation. So we'll have something for everyone. But yeah, let's talk about what this next either couple of weeks, few months, or the next year, maybe 2 years of your life is going to look like. So in terms of what you need to get into law school, besides deciding, yes, I want to be a lawyer, because there are definitely students that I've had that haven't really decided that they want to be a lawyer, and they put in all this work and they decide it's not for them. I highly recommend finding a reason that you want to practice law, because it's a extremely valuable and rewarding profession if that's what's in your heart. And if you remember why you want to be a lawyer, then all of this prep, all the studying that you do, the hours you spend at, writing essays and getting recommendations are so much worth it. If you remember that at the end of the day, you get to be a lawyer. So what goes into your application? Obviously, the LSAT. And I'm sure a lot of you are very, very aware of the LSAT as this big, scary gatekeeper. But it is one of the major pieces of quantifiable data that law schools will look at in evaluating your application. They'll look at your LSAT, they'll look at your GPA, your work experience, and your transcripts, your recommendations, and your essays. And all of this gets bundled up into a service called the Credential Assembly Service, which most people register for when they register for the LSAT. And it's just an online platform that you pay, I think it's $185 for, which doesn't expire, where you just upload your transcripts. And it doesn't help you find your transcripts. You have to find those on your own, but you get to upload it into the system, upload your letters of recommendation into the system. And then it's all there so that no matter what law school you apply to, it's all in one centralized place, along with your personal statement. And then certain law schools will have different addendum that they're looking for. And, you know, different law schools care about different things, but generally speaking, when you're looking at those letters of recommendation, they want one of those letters of recommendation at least to be academic in nature. So I know some of you might be out of school for a little while and may have a hard time tracking one down, but it is in many cases required that you get one. So spend that time hunting. If you've been out of school for 20 years, law schools won't understand. And the longer you're out of school, the less things like your GPA will matter to you. But it's good to know that you do have to secure these things to meet your application deadlines. So for those of you who are studying in December, planning to apply for next year, you need to be gathering the stuff as well as, I'm sure, studying nonstop for this test. Now, for all of you who are applying, the good news is you're in smaller and smaller company. Now, I know this is a lot of figures, but I want you to pay attention mostly to the trends of what you see happening here. As you can see, back in 2006, 2010, there was just this surge of people going to the law, to the field of law. You know, certainly this is when we had the financial crisis and people found that like law was a very steady profession, and it flooded the market. So up until a couple of years ago, we frankly had two many lawyers on our hands. But the pendulum has swung the other way, and law schools are actually really hungry for applicants. And so this is great news for you, because that means that they are more forgiving for LSAT scores and GPAs than what they have been in the past. They're more likely to consider you on the merit of you as a person, all your work experiences, your personal statement, who you are. So this is a good time to be applying. And certainly this dip in applicants is why you may have heard that some schools are now considering the GRE. And this is part of an effort by those schools to get their numbers back up. And so congratulations, you have picked the absolute right time to become a lawyer. So let's go into the timeline. Now, this timeline is slated for those people who either don't know when they're testing or are planning on testing in June. Now, for the 60% of you who are with me right now who are testing September and December, don't worry. I don't want you to fall into a panic, because this checklist is different for everyone. In an ideal world, I do always recommend prepping for the June test. It gives you the chance to do poorly on an LSAT, like you might get sick that day or may not be ready, and then you have the opportunity to take it in September or December, or next year it would be September or November. And so January is always just a good target. It's also an afternoon test, which I love. It's at 1 p.m., so you don't have to wake up super early to take this test. But you can basically scale this backwards to whenever you are planning on taking the test. Most people, and people often ask me, hey Max, how long do I need to spend studying for this test? And I will tell you that it is wildly different for everyone who takes the test. The LSAT is ultimately a skills test. It is, rather than test you on like your knowledge or content or like, what a right triangle is, things that you can learn. It's testing you on your ability to reason, which, like all abilities, are something that you can learn through practice, but different people improve at different speeds. So I typically recommend 3 to 6 months. And there's people that can cram it out and be ready in 6 weeks. There's people that need more time. I've had students that spent a year getting the score that they want, but they get it as long as they stick to it and they practice regularly. But a good rule of thumb is to give yourself like at least 3 to 6 months. And if you're not sure if when you're taking the test or if you're testing in June, don't wait to take a practice test. That is the first step for everyone. If you're testing in December and you haven't taken a practice test, absolutely take one this weekend if you can. We have some on. We have a free practice test you can take online at princetonreview.com. We also, depending if you're near a major city, we might be giving proctor tests in person, which is great. But take a test as soon as you can, because that will give you a sense of where you are right now and allow you to develop a plan for getting better. And yeah, and one of the benefits to taking a test with us is you get a breakdown of your score, and it shows oh, it's not that I'm not good at reading comp, it's that I'm not good at inference questions in reading comp. And it gives you something very specific that you need to work on. So take a test as soon as possible. And then you want to basically plan out your entire life between now and when you're testing. If you need to gain 10 points, that's something that most people can do in 3 months. If you need to gain more than that, you want to probably invest more time and make sure that you have time to practice. Like I said, I'll keep coming back to this idea, but the LSAT, again, is a skills test. So I equate this to working out or learning the trombone. It's something that you have to put in an hour and a half in 5 days a week if you want to see significant improvement. And for most people. So for these dates are good if you're testing in June. If you're testing in December, then hopefully you've taken a test and that you're already starting to practice. If you haven't started yet, again, sooner rather than later. And if you're testing in September, hopefully you did this months ago and you're going to be fine. And if not, that's fine. You can always take it again in December. We'll talk about how law schools look at taking it multiple times in a minute. And so once you have your plan, you just want to follow up on it. And so, This could be taking a class, it could be working with a tutor, it could be reading a book you got in the library. Just reading a book is a great way to practice in general. And you want to register as soon as possible. Again, if you're near a major city, test centers tend to fill up pretty quickly. I'm based in New York, and like the second week after registration opens, there's already test centers that are just closed for business. My expectation is that this is going to improve as LSAT works on including additional test dates, and there's always rumors of them going to a computer-based test, which would allow them to give even more testing opportunities. But for right now, you want to make sure that you're registering this as soon as you can. It's also a good time to have a sense of where you want to go. Your first test should give you a sense of where to set your application, or set your goal schools. And every single law school will publish its range of LSAT scores, and that's a good place to start when you're setting a goal. Because it's nice being like, oh, it's not that I want like a 180, it's that I want a 162 so I can go to Fordham. It's, I want like a 171 so I can go to Columbia. And having that like very, very specific idea in your mind is always helpful. So start looking at schools. And the other thing I would say on that too is don't just go by the U.S. News and World Report listing. That lists by a bunch of different criteria. And if you have a specialty, like if you want to practice family law or environmental law, Harvard may not be the #1 choice in those fields. As a matter of fact, the #2 choice for environmental law is University of Vermont Law School, rather. And I think there are 120 overall. But if for environmental law, that's the school. And so take some time and like actually research. Don't just I find that a lot of people are willing to invest time in studying for the test, and then when it comes to actually picking the school that they want to attend, the one that they want to be associated with for the rest of their life, they do like a 10-minute Google search. So really make sure that you're giving yourself time to pick the school that's right for you. And then when you get closer to the test, you're obviously going to be taking it, and hopefully you crush it your first time out. And based on that, you want to start applying to the different schools. We always recommend a ratio of like you want to set aside like, okay, these are schools that I can definitely get into. Then I have schools that are, in my range. I'll probably I might get into those. These are good schools, and then have some reach schools. And we recommend applying in a 2 to 3 to 2 ratio, which means 2 safety schools, 3 goal schools, and then 2 reach schools, just to give yourself options. If you bulk at the cost of application fees, just wait to have to pay tuition. But yeah, you want to set those applications out. And again, like that means you're getting your recommendations together and your personal statement together. And you may also want to start laying the groundwork as you get deeper into admission season for financial aid and just making sure that you get everything in at that deadline. Now, as we see here, this is the only bit of the admissions checklist that is kind of set in stone because this is when the admission season is, November to February. And so if you're taking in September, you're fine. If you're taking in June, you're great. If you're taking in December, you will make the deadlines for pretty much every school. Law schools are aware that a lot of people are taking, take the December test, so don't worry about that. There are some scholarship deadlines that play it close, and you may have to submit to a law school before you get your scores back. Many schools do that. Just talk to the admissions team, and they should help you out there. There's also, this is not universal. There are some schools that take applications late spring. There's even some that will have rolling admissions like into the summer for that fall. I just had a student who was waitlisted at Fordham. Like she was waitlisted in January, and they let her in the day before classes started. She was thrilled. This happened like last week. Admissions is a rolling process, but definitely check with the deadlines. And if the website doesn't tell you what you need to know, call the admissions folks. They're great people. They're lonely people, but they're there to help. So definitely spare a phone call. And again, if you have any questions about this admission stuff, I'm definitely open to answering them at the end. Make sure you're writing them down so we can get those at the end. Because now I want to talk about the beast itself, the LSAT. And like I said, this is the best test just of all time. It is simply the best. So for those of you who've been prepping, you probably know most of this already, but you're dealing with 5 sections of multiple choice questions. They're each 35 minutes, and they can come in any order. It's still a paper and pencil test, though they're working on touch screens, and there's no guessing penalty, which is nice, which means fill in everything when you're taking the test for real, and you just do D straight down. People often will have heard a rumor that a certain letter is better than another letter. Keep in mind these answer choices are randomized. So yeah, whatever letter makes you happy, that's your letter. Guess it straight down and do your best on the questions that you do attempt. I mentioned this briefly before, but most schools require the LSAT. There's a few schools that don't require a test at all, and now there are 4 schools which they're a really interesting mix of schools. It's Harvard, University of Arizona, Northwestern, and Georgetown have started taking the GRE, which I'll come back to later. But those are very different schools for the most part. And so trusting the GRE with your admissions is still kind of a gamble. The LSAT is still the most accepted test at schools. So if unless it's Harvard or bust for you, or University of Arizona or bust for you, I would plan on taking the LSAT there. And LSAT.org has a lot of information on the test dates. And that's also where you register for the test. We're going to go into the individual sections now of the test. So like I said, there are 5 35-minute sections, which will include 1 reading comprehension section, which if you've ever taken a standardized test in your life, you've done a reading comprehension section. And this maybe it's a little harder because they are testing to see whether you would be good at being a professional reader, but it is no different in terms of the structure. You have 4 passages. They're testing you on your comprehension, and that's it. Can you correctly identify information from a passage? Can you extract information, deal with it abstractly, and then answer questions about it? There's also a logical reasoning, which is a great section. Colloquially, people call it the argument section. You have two of these 2 argument sections that will give you a paragraph, and you essentially have to either just describe what's happening in an argument, which you might be useful, or extract information. But you might also have to describe why the argument is dumb, which I love. It's a test that gives you a piece of text that you have to look at and be like, well, this is dumb. This is written by a stupid person who does not understand reason. And it gives you the opportunity to actually just sass talk a test, which is part of the reason why I think this test is so much fun. In getting good at this, it involves a lot of study of logical fallacies and a lot of other just useful debate tactics. And then there's a games section, the analytical reasoning section, which are just logic puzzles. Like, people buy logic puzzles for fun, right? I mean, that is how I got into this test. There's a reason I took this test as a Christmas present to myself. Like, there's games on it, and the games are pretty straightforward. Abstractly, like you either have to put things in order, or you have to put things in different groups, and then they give you a variety of very puzzling clues that you have to use in order to answer the questions. It is literally a game. I find that most people start out hating the game section, like by far, like it's their least favorite section, and after they've been studying for not long, even like 2 or 3 weeks, they have so much fun with it. Like, my students do them on the subway, like after they've gone into law school. I've taken every single of the 80 LSATs that they've publicly released till now, and I'm not gonna lie, I'm really excited for the September test, so I get to see new games. It is so much fun. And so that's 4 sections: 1 reading comp, 2 arguments, and 1 game section. And then there's also experimental section, which LSAC uses for testing, and that could just be an extra games or an extra reading comp or an extra argument section, but it doesn't count. They use that for internal testing. You still have to treat it like it's real because you won't know which section it is when you're taking it. But yeah, it is an extra 35 minutes you have to work. And then there's the essay. The essay is just a writing sample. After you do the scored sections, after you do all the multiple choice, there's a short break. And then you have 35 minutes to write like a 4-paragraph essay that does not affect your LSAT score. And based on conversations I've had with admissions officers, does very, very little to influence your chances of being admitted. Still try your best, but your goal with a writing sample is simply just not to embarrass yourself. So as you're studying for the LSAT, practicing and worrying about the essay is not really a productive use of your time. So you'll be spending most of your time just getting very, very, very good at reading carefully, which is the main thing that the LSAT tests you on. This is tough because Princeton Review teachers are taught to teach Socratically, which means that we teach primarily through asking questions, and so keeping all the questions at the end is very unusual. I feel like I should just like ask questions and then just pause so you can answer them in your head. But I bet most of you know what the best possible score you can get on the LSAT is. And maybe you're shouting it out loud at your computer because you're so excited to be involved with this test right now. But it's a 180. A 180 is a perfect score. Like there's a lot of companies out there that are like 180 masters and like the 180 club and things like that. And a 180 is, it's cool, but it's like a Ferrari. Like you only get a 180 to impress your friends. You don't need a 180. And the bottom rung score is a 120, which is answering nothing on the test. But the curve on this test is kind of insane. I'm going to pull up this chart, and again, it's a lot of numbers, so I'm going to give you a second just to acclimate yourself to this. But we can see that, like, oh yeah, we have a 180 on top, and that's the 99.9 percentile. And we have a 173, which is 7 points lower, which is still the 99th percentile. One dude or dudette, but one person out of 100 people scores a 172 or better. Which is, I think, important when you're really considering like what is a good score. And you'll learn this as you start researching schools. But I feel like a lot of people have this idea that they have to get like a 175 or they're not going to law school. When in reality, there's no school, Harvard, Yale, Stanford included, there's no school in the world that requires anyone to get a 180 or a 175. Harvard will take you with a 173. Yale will take you with a 173. Like Fordham is top 30. They'll take you with a 161. And so like it's really important that sorry, hang on one second. Sorry about that. Yeah, so people have this like inflated notion of like what score they need. And just notice the concentration in the 150s here. Like a 150 is a 44th percentile and a 160 is the 80th percentile. So most people who take this test, or a plurality of people who take this test, are somewhere in the 150s, which means if that's where you're starting, every point you get is essential. Notice that like the 152 is where you start getting above the 50th percentile. And that's what I typically will call a, hey, congratulations, you're going to law school kind of score. Certainly it won't be a tier 1 school at that score, but you'll definitely get into like accredited law school. You'll get to be a lawyer with that. You can even get into some law schools with a score in the high 140s, depending on where you are. Yeah, if you're in the high 150s, low 160s, you're good for 90% of the law schools that exist. And so definitely make sure that you're researching these schools and you have a sense of what score you actually need. So I said the LSAT is a skills test. Well, what skills? Well, it's basically these skills. The main thing is this is a reading test, which is punishing if English is not your first language. But because law school is so text text-based, it's important that you have to come in as a extremely literate person. And there's definitely strategies that help with this. And that's something that we work on. But what I find that the best, hang on one second. Sorry again. And in addition to reading comprehension is not just for the reading section, but it's also for the argument section, for the game section. This is a test that has a lot of fun with the English language. And so one of the best things that you can do, especially if you have a lot of time, is just to be in the habit of reading things at a certain academic level. We'll be talking about specific things that you want to read, but LSAC pulls a lot from Scientific American, from The Economist. They'll pull from the New York Times sometimes. So reading text at that level is just good foundation. If you come to the test as someone who reads a lot, you just instantly have a leg up on your competition. But in addition to that, they want to see if you, in terms of organization management, that's a lot of what the game section tests. Can you organize your thinking? Can you break it down into one step followed by another step and chase a clear progression of logical ideas? And if you've been studying, I'm sure you're drowning in stuff on conditional statements and different quantity statements, and all that is essential. And disciplining your mind is one of the things that takes a good deal of practice, as does critical thinking. Now, it's a skill, but it's a skill that can be learned. And along with analysis and evaluation, this is how you determine whether an argument is essentially well-reasoned or poorly reasoned, as a lot of them are. And studying different forms of logical fallacies is a good place to start, because the LSAT relies on pattern recognition. Can you identify a causal flaw? Can you identify a comparison flaw? And by being familiar with these patterns, you can actually start to recognize them, which is actually kind of funny, because when you study for this test, you actually are building your ability to think critically, which I have this terrible track record. I have caused 4 breakups now among my students because I taught them to argue better, and it ruined their relationship. So as you are studying for the LSAT, you are actually learning to think like a lawyer, but use that sparingly. This is not to win arguments with people you love. It's to win arguments against your opponents in a courtroom. And so, yeah, by preparing for the test, you're becoming a better reader. You're becoming better at analyzing arguments. You're becoming better at recognizing when a plan is not well secured. You're becoming a better, you're better able to recognize when something is worded to deceive you, which if you're going to contract law is essential. So preparing for the LSAT actually helps you think like a lawyer. Which is why law schools have been using the test for so long. It also, and don't take this personally if you've been struggling with the LSAT, but the LSAT it is predictive of performance in law school in the first year, because the first year is where you're doing a lot of reading and a lot of analysis and a lot of writing. So the LSAT correlates very strongly with performance. A lot of law schools, based on the quantitative data, are they're really good at predicting what your performance is. And there are plenty of outliers. You may not test well, and if you can convince a school of that, and many of my students have, you can absolutely get in and you can achieve well. But if you don't like reading things, and if you don't like arguing, and if you don't like thinking really hard about an argument, then it's possible the field of law is not for you. Yeah, and so preparing for this test makes you more lawyerly. And conversely, thinking like a lawyer is a good way to prepare for the test, both in how you organize your time and your structure, but also in how you approach arguments. You can treat this test as you preparing to represent a client, right? If you are looking at an argument and you have to see like, oh, is this a convincing argument? Like, you can treat this like you need to assess this for someone who's paying you. Like, that's the profession. And so like training your mind to think in a very literal way and a very critical way is essential to doing well in this test. And again, that's actually part of why I love it, because I think it's probably the best correlated test of all the tests that get you into graduate programs. But like I said, it's not your only option. If you are only considering the University of Arizona, Northwestern, Georgetown, and Harvard, if that is it and nowhere else, you may consider the GRE. Typically, I will say the GRE, it's a fine test. It's very much based in vocab for the reading, and there's a lot of math on that. And for some people whose first language is not English, it is definitely easier to do well on the GRE than the LSAT. But I would consider the GRE more fallback after you are sure that you're not ready to take the LSAT. You can give it a shot, but again, it severely limits your options. You can only apply to these 4 schools right now. So although you can take it, that is not that's not what Plan A should be. And if you're struggling with the LSAT, that's fine. I mean, we here at the Princeton Review take in people with all ranges of scores. I think probably my students typically start at like a 140, which is fine, because it's not about where you start, it's about where you end up. And so if you give yourself enough time to practice and you commit to practicing, you will get better. And the Princeton Review, we have in-person courses. We have online courses. We have free sample classes that you can take. We have one-on-one tutoring. I'm a tutor. I'm a classroom teacher in the New York area. And we have self-directed classes. We have books. There's a lot of stuff. There's just so many materials out there that are designed to help you get better at the LSAT. And like I said, this always starts with taking a free practice test. But what I would say is, if you need to, improve considerably, like, you probably don't want to prep on your own. This is kind of a funny order. We also provide homework help, which I think is great if you're still in your undergraduate, or if it's going to be a while, and you're still in control of your GPA, because GPA is an important consideration, but it's hard to change, like, once it starts going poorly. So we have homework help available in any subject to help you get on your feet. We can also help you with your admissions writing if that's something that you're into. But our main focus for you potential LSAT takers is, it's just like getting that LSAT score up. You're in so much control of your LSAT. Probably our best option for most of you is we have what we call the ultimate course, which is, it's pretty ultimate. It's 84 hours of prep, which is great, and we average a 12-point increase. You will probably get better than that on private one-on-one tutoring if you put in 20 hours, but like, I think 84 hours with, potentially I teach a lot of these in the New York area, is a lot. That could be the difference between, again, the 40th percentile and the 89th percentile. Like, this is a huge jump. But the only people that improve are the people that, again, commit to putting in the work, the people that can set aside time every day to do something. And it doesn't have to be doing a section. It could be doing like a Ken or Sudoku or one of those puzzles. It could be reading something, or it could just be like working on a very specific skill set. Like, today I'm going to work on ordering, or today I'm going to work on identifying a language shift, which, for those of you who are studying for right now, you're like, oh yeah. And for those of you who aren't studying, you have no idea what I'm talking about, but you will, child. You sweet child of summer, you will. And so, we have a variety of options. And so I have one more poll to put in the field. which is right here. And this is just for action steps because people will be following up with you. And if you want information on like, oh, you need help on boosting your GPA, if you need help on how to prepare for the LSAT, if you want to try out the GRE, maybe it's not necessarily law. If you want to go into like a master's in public policy or IPP or global studies or just any of the humanities, you might take the GRE for another reason. So if you're on the fence about whether it's law school or something else, feel free to have someone follow up with you about the GRE, which again is an okay test, but it's not as fun as the LSAT. The LSAT is just so good. Cool. And great. I think this is going to help, just help you talk about like relevant stuff so they can put you in touch with an expert who's actually an expert in the thing you want to be talking about. So we're about ready to go over to questions. You're filling up so I am going to kick it back over to Valerie, who's also going to tell me if I forgot to mention anything important. But this question time I think is extremely valuable. So please, even if you don't have questions, stay on the line and make sure that someone else might ask something you weren't even thinking of that turns out to be extremely useful to you. So yeah, Valerie, do you want to take it back?
All right. Thanks so much, Max, for that admissions plan of attack. So it looks like we do have a couple of questions from our attendees, and we actually had a couple of attendees submit their questions in advance, so we will reward them for their diligence. All right, so let's go ahead and start with the first question we received ahead of time. One of our attendees wrote in to say, I have been a stay-at-home parent for the last 6 years and have held no jobs before that. I have a couple of extracurriculars, but nothing big. How do I handle this on my resume and personal statement? Can I put right on my resume that I've been a stay-at-home parent? Any thoughts and advice that you can provide for that attendee?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't advise lying about it, and there's really no need. The great thing about law school is they really above all else, which is why it doesn't matter what your undergraduate major is. So yeah, if you're a stay-at-home mom, I mean, lots of people go into the law after a career or after raising a family. But what's important is that you show that you can do it. So in that situation, LSAT score is going to matter a lot more because there's nothing you don't have as clear a basis. You can't be like, I was CEO of this company. You could see that I did this. But if you show up with a good LSAT score and a good personal statement and good letter of recommendation, they'll consider you as much as they would anyone.
All right, awesome. All right, so next question. How do you indicate to law schools that you are an underrepresented minority? Is there a form? I'm thinking perhaps, Max, do you have any advice on how to incorporate this in a personal statement? What would you suggest?
I mean, you could make when you're registering for the test, they do ask you demographic information, and that's something that the law school just gets along with your score. You don't have to bend over backwards about it. If there's something about your cultural identity that is core to your being, definitely include it. But if you're just, I mean, if you're looking for admissions points, you're gonna get those they're gonna know just from looking at your forms. So make sure that your personal statement is about something that you do care passionately about. And again, if that's your culture, that's great. But if you're doing that just to score points, don't bother.
All right, great. So another question we had come in was, how do law schools view taking the LSAT twice? If you don't like where you get into law school, can you reapply the following year?
If you don't like where you get into law, so the core of this question is something that I get asked a lot. According to LSAC, and I'm going to say that this is according to LSAC, and so it has a degree of truth to it, law schools average your score. But in practice, that's not really the case. I've talked to dozens, scores, maybe almost 100 admissions advisors, and basically none of them do that. Certainly, like certain law schools do have a lot of applicants, but I was talking to the admissions advisor at Yale, and he put it very well, which is your LSAT scores tell a story. So yeah, if you score like a 157 and then a 155 and then a 159, they'll average that. Like they'll look at it and be like, oh yeah, you're about in that range, because your score will fluctuate just because, like, I don't know, the difficulty of that test for you, like maybe you didn't understand a particular thing, so your score will average a couple of points from test to test. But if you take the test and you get like a 140 and then you get a 155 and then you get like a 168, they're not averaging that, because the story that tells is of someone that looked and saw that they weren't quite good enough, and they worked their butt off and they got a better score. Now, in a better case scenario, you wouldn't take the test if you knew that your score wasn't there. But if you've already taken it and then you're like, no, I want to do better, and you do, if you deliver on that, then law schools will generally respect that. Just quickly, the tail end of that story, the guy at Yale was saying that he had someone apply with a 178, and then a 178, and then a 178, and then a 178. And they did, or I guess it's three, but they did not take him because that person was insane and should not have done it. So yeah, even if you're a high scorer, don't fall into a crazy trap.
All right, thanks so much. So let's go on to the next question. My GPA is in the lower threes. I'm not too happy about it. I am a hard worker and really built up my resume the past few years during undergrad. Do you think law schools would overlook my grades if I have the professional experience and letters of recommendation to back it up?
Admissions in general are really just a balancing act. I mean, again, like it's better if your GPA is higher, and Princeton Review offers tutoring for homework help and things like that. Plug, plug, plug. But like if your GPA is lower than you would like, you and you're aware of that, like that's something you want to balance out. So you balance it out with better LSAT score. You balance it out with better work experience, a more convincing personal statement. It's just you can still get into those law schools, and you just have to work at it. You just have to find your way to make sure that it all evens out into a place that you're happy with.
All right. Another question we had was, how long is your LSAT score valid for? Do I have to go to school right after I get my score?
Oh, sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Yeah, LSAT scores are valid for 5 years, so not right after, but usually that's fine. If you are leaving undergraduate and then planning to work for a little while, I often advise people take the LSAT the summer after they graduate, because you're still in the mode of like studying and reading things, where after you've been in the workplace for a little while, you may be a little bit out of practice with standardized tests. So yeah, if you know you're going to go into law school in the next half decade, definitely take the test.
All right. What sort of literature should we read on the side? Fiction, nonfiction, essays, speeches, novels, any kind of tips as to how people can hone their reading comp skills to get ready for the test backs?
Well, what an excellent question. Reading in general is the silver bullet. Reading just makes you a better person, and to a certain extent, it doesn't matter what, but you want to be at least marginally challenged by what you read. It could be fiction. Certainly, like I read a lot of fiction, I read a lot of nonfiction, and some of the fiction I've read has definitely been harder than the nonfiction. So it's not really the subject matter. If you ever try to read Gravity's Rainbow, that's a tough book, and it's fiction. But it is important that you read. Like I said, LSAC in the reading comp, they'll pull from real articles, and a lot of those real articles are taken from law reviews and taken from The Economist, Scientific American, other periodicals of that ilk. But no, it's not important that you just read nonfiction. As a matter of fact, because a lot of what they give you is often very abstract and confusing, sometimes reading a very nerdy fantasy novel is good, because it forces you to learn all sorts of like new words for things, and you're constantly adapting to a new situation. So ultimately, as long as long as the reading level of the book is of an appropriate level, it does not matter what you read. Just read.
All right, cool. So it looks like we have time for maybe about 4 or 5 questions, depending on how long you take, Max. But all right, so what can I use to research law schools? And before Max answers, I'm going to tell all of you guys that I'm going to drop a link in the chat box. And this will be a link. We actually have some really great advice pages on the PrincetonReview.com, and it tells you everything from, it basically reinforces everything Max has talked about tonight. So go ahead and check out those advice pages. We also have a really awesome law specialty quiz. So if you're still deciding what kind of law you think you want to practice, we actually have a really fun quiz that you can take. So go ahead and check out those links. But I'm also going to pass it on to Max to see what else he advises us.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think actually we do have a great deal of good resources. There's tons of books and rankings out there, and it can be overwhelming. I would say that there's a few different factors that you want to consider. So rather than like how you get the information, it's up to you. But definitely look at what their graduates are doing. So make sure that they're working in your field, and make sure that they're working. A lot of law schools, pretty much all law schools will publish how many of their graduates actually are admitted to the bar and how many of their graduates end up working as a lawyer, and that's an important consideration. But yeah, look at the fields that people are working afterwards, and then that's the statistical end of it. And but to get the personality of a school, there's nothing better than visiting it, or at least speaking to. If you speak to admissions officers, a lot of times schools will have an alumni network, and you can actually speak to alumni and get their actual personal experiences, which I think is best. If you're very busy, even so, I would still try to make the time and actually have like a personal connection once you start narrowing it down. But yeah, start looking at just any ranking of schools by field if you know what you want to study. And if you don't know what you study, then think of like what's important to you. Make a list. Like, is location important to you? Cost, prestige, like, and actually try to have a sense of like what you care about.
All right. So here's a question that we are frequently asked. How critical is it to take a diagnostic test? I haven't begun to prepare for the test yet. Should I wait to take a full-length test to see where I'm at after I've done some prep? I'm worried it will be too discouraging if I score low.
Hey, you love yourself, okay? You can just look in that mirror and you love yourself. Now, the first thing that you do for any test is to take a practice test cold. Because again, you don't know what you need to study and you don't know how much work you need. If you take a practice test and it's a 170, great. But if it's a 130, you really want to look at like, okay, well, what's making that 130? And then that also gives you a sense of like, do you need help? Can you do this on your own? But yeah, like it's not personal. It's like I said, it's a skills test. Like if I gave you a trombone right now and you weren't good at it, like I don't want you going away and being like, oh man, I stink. I'm not good at anything. Like if you've never played the trombone, I'm sure you're not excellent at it right now. Treat the LSAT like a skill, and a skill that you may not have been practicing, your entire life. But yeah, take a test ASAP, everyone, all of you. Take a test like tomorrow.
All right. How do law schools look at multiple undergrad GPAs? Do they blend them or go with whoever conferred your degree?
That is kind of that's very situational. It depends on how long you're at each school and like the difficulties of the school. Again, they're looking. I mean, ultimately they'll look at the number and they'll look at the school that conferred the degree. But depending on the school, they might, if they look closer at it, it sort of depends on your own situation. That's something we can one off about it if you want to talk to someone concerned. You see what the case is for you as an individual.
All right, so just digging through these comments. Give me a second. Okay. So is applying to law school as a college senior and planning on matriculating directly after graduation a detriment to admissions? I have heard that law schools accept more people with at least 1 year of work experience after college.
Um, God, there's just so many rumors about admissions. Like blank is the easiest test and stuff like this comes up a lot. Again, like you present a strong application. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter where you are in life. Law schools will gauge it on its merits. What I will say is don't get locked into the idea of going to law school right away. Because the thing I don't want you doing is taking the test before you're ready. And I feel like a lot of people do that. They're like, no, I'm going to law school this fall. So even though I'm only scoring a 136, just whatever. And like, if they had just waited a year, if they had just like worked a year, they could have gotten that score up like 20 points and gone to a better law school and like, had more financial aid come their way. So it's not a detriment, but don't take the test before you're ready, and don't feel like you have to take it.
All right, Max. So it looks like we're getting a lot of questions about how to position yourself as an applicant who perhaps may have had a low undergrad GPA. So what's your advice for our attendees who, fall into this bucket?
Yeah, absolutely. I hope I'm not shortchanging people. I do want to like keep a clip going so I can answer the most amount of questions. But the short answer is you need to sell them on the idea that you are going to be a successful student and a successful lawyer. So you can do that by showing you have the ability to do well by having a high LSAT score. Certainly, some people like, and this isn't something that I'm recommending, but some people take some like post-bac courses, some just like postgraduate courses, and just show that they have that ability to do well in that kind of environment. Again, work experience is a good way for balancing that out, but whatever, or like good letters of recommendation, but whatever you can to just like whatever your weakness is, whether it's GPA or whether it's lack of work experience or something like that, whatever the weakness is, just find other admissions criteria that you can use to balance it out. You all are in complete control of your LSAT score. You do not have to take this test before you are scoring in the 160s. You don't have to. And again, if you're scoring the 150s and that's all you need, great. But like until you have the score that you need, you don't need to take the test. No one's making it. So just keep that in mind. Sorry, and one other thing. If you do have a master's degree, they do officially just care about your undergraduate degree, but your master's degree can again show that you can succeed at a postbac level.
All right, awesome. So let's round out the night with an LSAT related question. So I'm taking the LSAT in September, and I've seen my score drop within the last week from a 164 to a 159, which was my most recent score. I'm worried that it will continue to drop. Is it reasonable to think that I can score 165 on the test, even though the test is so close?
Yeah. Oh man. Oh no. Yeah. So you scored a 164. You absolutely can score a 165. Like you have it in you. Like I said, depending on the test, you might just like have a bad game that you don't understand, or you might have a bad reading that you don't understand, and there's no controlling that. And that's fine. Like, and if that happens on the September testing, you'll take it in December, and that's fine. But the thing that kills people and the thing that might be happening with you is just anxiety. And this is something that my students deal with a lot. And when you start thinking about your performance and like what it means and like how important it is and like, oh my God, the test is coming, you stop thinking about your process. You stop thinking about the things that you're doing well. You're thinking more about how you're doing on the test than what you're doing on the test. And so, yeah, you'll dip, but you'll definitely bounce back. What I would say is on that 159, take an afternoon when you're feeling nice and calm, go back over and see if you understand why you got questions wrong. And if you can, then that's encouraging. But yeah, definitely come at it from a perspective of, you can do it. And if you mess something up, that's fine. Try to understand why you messed it up and try to fix it for the future.
All right, let's take one more question. What is the best way to decide what type of lawyer you want to be? There's so many options. And for this attendee, I'm going to pop a link in our chat box. We actually have a quiz that will help you figure out what law specialization is best for you. So if anyone else is interested, popping it in the quiz in the chat box right now. And for those of you who are listening to the recording, it is princetonreview.com/law school quiz. All right, Max, any words of advice?
Oh man, what a great last question. So, I mean, I can't tell you what you're going to enjoy doing with the rest of your life. What I will say is, if you don't know, that's fine. Most people don't when they go into law school. And a lot of people who do have an idea change their mind. Right now, for all of you, the idea of being a lawyer is still this abstract thing. And for some of you, maybe you have a very specific, inspiring purpose that's driving you. But maybe some of you just love the law, and that's okay. Or maybe some of you just want that job security, which is fine. But you'll come to love the law, or you won't be as happy. But no, I mean, if there's nothing in your personal life, if there's nothing in your interests or hobbies that drives you to family law or immigration law or corporate law or contract law, then that's fine. A lot of what law school is about learning about the nature of the law and finding something that's right for you. So in that case, I would go for a school that is just generally well regarded. So not necessarily a specialization school. But really, it's just think about why you want to be a lawyer in the first place. Why the law? Why not be a business person or a doctor or a carpenter, something like that. And if you really tap into it, it's I like the law because I love arguing, and you probably want to be a litigator. I love the law because I'm good with the minutia and things like that. I love the law because I love a certain industry. Just think about what you would want to be doing in your free time. The law is broad, and that's a great opportunity for you. That means that you get to practice a sort of law that can potentially make you happy. There's this image of the grumpy, embittered lawyer, and I think that comes from people that don't spend the time thinking okay, why do I want to do this? If you answer that question, then you're going to be set for the entire process of studying for the LSAT, going to law school, passing the bar, and being a lawyer. But yeah, find that drive and you'll be fine.
All right, I lied. One more question, only because we have a high school senior in the house. So I definitely want to make sure that we, encourage them to stay on the path. So their question is, hello, I'm a senior in high school and was wondering what I should start doing as a college freshman to both prepare as an applicant to law school and prepare for the LSAT. Thinking about majoring in philosophy, by the way.
I felt so good about that last one. It's this big inspiring call to action. I'm sure everyone was heard some violin music in the background. Everyone was probably weeping right now. So high school student, look at you, you're so together. So you have total control of your GPA. Your only responsibility is to keep your GPA high until your junior year. You don't have to worry about the LSAT even existing. You don't have to major in anything in particular. Law schools will take whoever will take you whatever you want to study. Philosophy is nice because it gives you a background in argument and logical reasoning. But just study something that you're interested in because then you're more likely to keep your GPA up. Also, a lot of schools, especially larger schools, will have a law school advisor. If you track them down, they can potentially be a resource in terms of lining up good internships for you while you're at school and getting you set on your process. But yeah, the LSAT doesn't become a thing for you until fall of your junior year when you take your first practice test. Yeah, but definitely stay to it, but keep your GPA high. That's the best thing you can do for future you. Yeah, is that it?
All right, so it looks like that's all the time we have for questions. Once again, if we didn't get around to your question, just rest assured that someone will definitely be in touch with an answer. And also, if you happen to think of any questions after tonight's webinar, feel free to drop us a line at questions@review.com. And as a reminder, each of you will be receiving an email with a link to tonight's recording. If you'd like to check out our other upcoming webinars, head on over to princetonreview.com/webinars. And also feel free to pass on this link to friends and classmates. We have webinars on all different topics. And once again, thank you, Max, for sharing all of your LSAT and law school wisdom with us. And thank you to all of our attendees for joining us tonight. Max, any parting words?
Like I said, this is a skills test, and not all of you will start at the same place. This road will be hard for some of you, and maybe some of you have already found it hard. It's easy to get discouraged, but again, it's a skill. Anyone can learn to get good at this test as long as they put in the work. But yeah, you have to treat it like something you have to be disciplined and regimented about, something that you stick with even when you suck at it, especially when you suck at it. That's when you have to work twice as hard. So do your best not to get discouraged. That is the only thing that will get in your way. So yeah, if you just keep your eye on the prize, have a smart way of studying, something that's like actually giving you valuable processes that you can be practicing, you're gonna do fine.
All right. So goodbye, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Bye, everyone. Thank you, Max.